Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, October 6th, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by Council members Bob Blumenfield, Mitchell Englander, and Mike Bonin, and we are ready to begin. We have three closed session items today, which members I think will go to after our consent candidate items. I'd propose items 6 and 7 as consent candidates, and unless anybody has comments or questions.
I have one question on number 7. That should be very quick.
Okay, well, and we also have a card, I think, on both of those matters. So why don't we go ahead and we'll take comment on public comment on those matters, and then Mr. Blumenfield, your question, we'll get those out of the way, and then we'll go to our closed session. So why don't we start with item number 6, and we have Alan Toy on number 6.
Item number 6 is the motion, Bonin Martinez, relative to instructing the City Administrative Officer and the Chief Legislative Analyst to identify $25,000 in matching funds to supplement the Los Angeles County grant for the West Side Center for Independent Living.
Thank you. And I would happily pull my card if you want to put it through in consent, but actually, you know what? You should know what you're voting on, and I'm happy to be here to tell you. The West Side Center for Independent Living is one of the, as your notes say, one of the preeminent service providers for people with all kinds of disabilities on the West Side. We got our building years ago, 30 years ago, through efforts of then council members Zev Yaroslavsky and Marvin Browdy, and they were able to put together funding for a nascent little group of people with disabilities on the West Side who wanted to become an independent, and had become an independent living center, but didn't really have a good place to call home. So they purchased this building, and we actually, the building cost more than the city's assessor, so a family foundation stepped up and paid the additional amount, which amounted to 11%. So we're tenants in common with the city. The WCIL owns 11% of the building, the city owns 89%. And over the years, the city has been pretty good about doing the needed repairs, but of late, the budget problems, finances, et cetera, they've been told to kind of not do that anymore. So we're asking you for a one-time amount for $25,000, which Zev Yaroslavsky, even though we're not technically in his district, we do serve people all through his district and all of yours too, I might add. He said he will match the city's contribution, but the city, being the owner, should make the contribution first. Our family, who gave us the 11% years and years ago, has said, if you can get the city to come up with the money that's a match for Zev's, we will match the city's $25,000, and we'll match Zev's $25,000. So we need $120-some thousand to do the repairs. Some of them couldn't wait, so we did them already. So it's roughly $100,000 that we need to finish the repairs that are needed on the building, including plumbing, new AC and heating, et cetera. And with your contribution, we can turn that into 4 times the amount that we're asking the city, and so we hope that you'll pass that.
Great.
If I could just say one thing. Thank you, Alan, for testifying. I just want colleagues to understand this is an organization that serves a tremendous part of the city with a wonderful mission. And as we ask CLA and CAO to look into where we could find $25,000, I do want to mention there's a time sensitivity to it because Mr. Yaroslavsky is only in office for a few more weeks, and that commitment does not extend past his time in office. So if CLA,
it's not his money, it's his office.
Yes, it could look quickly at that and maybe make a recommendation in the FSR or something like that, because we're running out of time.
Thank you, Council Member. That's correct, yeah.
Great. Any other, well, actually we have one more card, Mr. Herman.
Good afternoon, citizens of Los Angeles. It's obvious that this grant for the West Side Center for Independent Living shouldn't come out of the cost of the taxpayer's donation. It should be matched by each public official here and the 15 members to allocate money out of their own special fund or their furniture fund, but not come out of some special interest deposit for this matching fund. It's not that I'm against independent living. I have nothing against them whatsoever. But again, we hear how Jerry Brown says he has millions of dollars to be utilized to vamp up our economic disaster. So why not, at this time, ask the governor to succeed more than $25,000 to match in response to this? I find it a failure to maintain and facilitate the independent living matching funds. And Mr. Bonin, you know, you should know better than to touch on the monies of the taxpayers on such an offer by the supplement of the Los Angeles County grant. How many grants and bonds have the city of Los Angeles abused by not controlling its expenditures, huh? So again, another wasteful project. It should be done in a transparency for the public to see if our taxpaying dollars are good enough for the West Side, because I'm sure there's other amenities of resolving this type of transaction of money that the taxpayers would rather want. Thank you.
Thank you. You can stay right there. I'm going to call you next. If there's anybody else who'd like to offer public comment on any of the agenda items or in public comment, matters of general interest within the jurisdiction of this committee, please fill out one of these cards and bring it forward. We'll be taking 1 minute of comment on the closed session items. If anybody would like to, is there anybody who'd like to comment on the closed session items? Mr. Herman, I have one card from you on item number 2. If there's anybody else who'd like to comment on the closed session items, please bring your card forward before we go into closed session. Go right ahead, sir.
Now, in regards to item number 2, talking about discrimination and alleged harassment, it doesn't state whether or not the harassment could be a sexual harassment, but I think any public official, any administrative person whose staff or themselves are involved in these types of cases should be removed or stepped down from office.
Sir, this is a settlement of a litigation. You may comment on the settlement
And I'm speaking
proposal
about-
to settle this litigation.
I'm speaking about this closed session that's coming up under Michael Fernandez versus the City of Los Angeles Superior Court case number BC 463184. So anything that deals with we, the taxpayers, paying for cases of alleging discrimination and harassment should be our interest to point out you spend and waste taxpayers' dollars on these outside settlement like you've done recently with Jose Huizar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There being no other cards on the closed session items, public comment on items 1, 2, and 3 is now closed. And we will now proceed to those items. So we'll hold number 7 until later.
Excuse me, sir. You were still on item 6 prior to opening up the closed session items for comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't take action on that. I apologize. I thought we had done that. So.
Move approval.
Thank you. If there's no objection, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the instruction to the CAO and CLA to report back with recommended funding options. All right, so that brings us to the closed session items. We'll begin with item number 1. And so who here is on something other than the closed session items? All right, it's about 50-50, so we'll go back to the other room. All right, thank you, everyone. We are back now in open session for the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, and our next item on the agenda is item number 4.
Item number 4 is the City Attorney report relative to outside counsel expenditures for fiscal year 2013-14 as of June 30th, 2014.
Good
Thank you
afternoon.
for your patience.
Thank you. I'm happy to do it. So, as you see, we have now as we do report quarterly, this report covers all of the previous fiscal year. And I hope we've never really talked about the layout of this report. I hope it's in a way that's I was studying it again while I waited for you all, and you see we set out the expenditures by department. So I was appreciating, again, the layout myself.
Can you draw some year-to-year comparisons over the last few years and how we're doing with our outside counsel expenditures?
Yes, actually, since you asked, we are up. I mean, in fiscal 14, expenditures increased actually by about $7 million, actually. And I was looking at some of the reasons for that, particularly within the proprietary departments. You know, a lot of different things going on there, runway litigation at the airport and environmental concerns both at the harbor and at the DWP. So that's where a great increase was in expenditures in the airport. I mean, I'm sorry, in the proprietary departments as a whole. Actually, the conflicts panel went up as well. I mean, because the increase of which I speak, the $7 million increase, is across the board, citywide. So I was looking to where those expenditures, the increases were greatest, and conflicts panel went up by quite a bit last fiscal year as well.
And at the end of at the end of fiscal year 13-14 in June, we appropriated an additional $1.4 million from the UB for outside counsel expenditures. How confident are you that for this year we've budgeted sufficient amounts to be able to finish the year?
Actually, though I don't want you to quote me on it, I'm feeling very good about the $4 million was appropriated this fiscal year, which more closely actually mirrored our projections, which was not the case last fiscal year. So we actually were slightly underfunded for the previous fiscal year. So in answer to your question, feel that this fiscal year we will be in better shape with regard to staying within that amount.
Okay, thank you. Members? Mr. Blumenfield?
Just what are the areas where if we had more in-house expertise that we could lower the cost of the outside counsel?
Well, actually, that is something we look to. In the general funded areas, which would be in the council control department areas, there's still a fair bit of expenditure on FLSA matters. There's some police employment matters, and we do, obviously you've just heard some police employment matters, but in the specific FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act area,
Right.
Those matters we send out still. It's a kind of a particular expertise. And then in the proprietaries, it's a lot of environmental work. We're spending a great amount in those areas. So
Has there been analysis in terms of the cost benefit of bringing in more in-house expertise?
we've looked at it, but not, I'd like to actually do further work on that and propose some things to my boss, to the city attorney, with regard to where we're spending the most on outside counsel. And then we would come to you, of course.
Maybe we can help you do that by asking you to do that.
Yes,
and saying,
yes.
Please, as a committee direction, please do that analysis.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any formal thing we need to do.
I think you just did it.
Okay.
And I think that can be a part of our action today will be that request to the city attorney's office as well.
Okay, we will bring that back to you.
Thank you.
What was
Mr. Islander.
Just a quick question on the ITA outside counsel. What was that for? It looks like it was special funded, but I don't
Yes.
remember spending money on outside counsel for IT.
Oh, we have, there's the TUT, the cellular phone litigation,
Oh.
a big piece of litigation in that area. That was the largest part of that. I'm trying to remember. Oh, and the cable franchise. And then we have now, well, actually the proposed citywide internet Wi-Fi. That's going on now, the citywide.
I've heard a little something about that.
Yeah. So those are the two areas in IT.
Mr. Bond?
Just a quick question. I noticed, sort of related, I think, to what Mr. Blumenfield was asking. Under fire and police pensions and under lacers, there's just a a lot of repetitive stuff. Legal advice on tax law matters, fiduciary counsel on pension and retirement matters, again. I mean, do we need to be having more in-house counsel for our pension funds? This just seems like a lot.
Yes. Now, and that is a rather unique area, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but the pension departments do have fiduciary counsel, which needs to be arguably separate from our office, because the pension funds are, run such as they are, and there's a certain, the fiduciary concerns for the pension departments, that aspect of them does require outside counsel, just because of the way they're funded and run. But I agree with you, there's tax counsel there that arguably we could, if we had the expertise in-house, could handle. So that aspect, yes, but the fiduciary and investment advice historically has and probably should go out for the pension departments, pension funds, I mean.
Good, thank you.
I assume the fiduciary counsel's duty of loyalty is to the beneficiaries of the funds rather than the city, so there's a...
See, counsel, you have answered it better than I did. That's exactly right.
Is that
and
right?
there's a reason why.
It makes sense that we couldn't bring that in-house, really.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on this? All right, and I'm sorry. We have... Yes, we do have a card on this for Mr. Herman. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
We are on item 4, correct?
Yes.
Good. Because this has to do with council. My time started too soon as well. But council's expenditures for the fiscal year seem very unethical, because they don't provide anticipation for the challenges of the city's failure to maintain the city's reserve for credit of negative and financial impacts, that we are still under a budget deficit. So the reality of all this jargon and that booklet in your hand there, those statistics, as far as I'm concerned, prove nothing to the manner of what Mr. Cantor in the Commission's report stated, that you have not done a good job, you failed to budget, and the city's general ledger reserve funds of $551.4 million, and to adjust it simply by $136.4 million will not satisfy what the taxpayers are asking.
Without objection, it'll be the action of the committee to note and file the city attorney's report with Mr. Bloomfield's comments. That brings us to item number 5.
Item number 5, the City Controller Report relative to the preliminary financial report on financial operations for the City of Los Angeles for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2014.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Todd Bowie, I'm here on behalf of the Controller's Office to present to you the Controller's preliminary financial report for 2014. The city began this new fiscal year with a reserve fund balance of 7.5%. This is 2.5% above the city's reserve fund policy and the highest balance since the city began tracking the July 1 adjusted balance in 1998. While the city did finish the year financially better than anticipated, I would acknowledge that the historically high reserve was contributed to by the actions of mayor and council, wherein the mayor proposed a budget with a reserve in excess of the reserve fund policy to start, and the council, when additional revenues were identified and the budget processed, used those revenues to further bolster the reserve fund. Likewise, mayor and council allocated funding to meet the 1% capital infrastructure improvement policy, which the controller wholly supports, as some of the city's infrastructure challenges have been well documented. To this end, we believe that a capital infrastructure strategic plan, as has been directed by the council, will provide a valuable tool in planning, prioritizing, and resourcing the city's capital projects. While this office acknowledges the city is not at a point where funding is readily available to meet all of its needs, the funding of the 1% capital infrastructure improvement policy was linked in the budget to a lesser contribution to the Budget Stabilization Fund. The current Budget Stabilization Fund balance is $64 million. When we look back at the beginning of the last recession, in fiscal year 2009, the general fund revenue shortfall based on the Budget Stabilization Fund policy would have been $72 million. And in mitigating 5 prior years of revenue growth below 3.4% from fiscal year 09 through fiscal year 2013, the city would have used over $200 million from the Budget Stabilization Fund based on analysis assuming that contributions had been made in preceding stronger revenue growth years. In terms of the recommendations we've made in this report, we're encouraging revisiting certain financial policies, some of which have been in effect since 2005. We believe it is a healthy practice to periodically review policies as time, circumstance, and best practices change. In this case, we're asking what is the right level of reserve for the city to maintain? And how do we ensure adequate funding for both capital improvement and revenue stabilization? We know these are ideas the council and CAO have or are in the process of considering, and these are important questions without easy or absolute answers. We encourage the discussion and deliberation as a healthy process, and we look forward to it. Thank you for your time this afternoon and for your consideration of the Controller's preliminary financial report. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
First question I have is, how long has it been since we had a reserve fund this high again?
We started tracking it as an adjusted July 1 balance back in 1998.
That's a good thing.
Yes,
Okay.
very good
Just
thing.
want to make sure. Okay. Mr. Bonnet.
Just wondering, has City Watch called to verify all this stuff for their next column?
Not to me personally.
Mr. Blumenfield.
So, obviously, good news. We're all happy about it. What are some of the areas where the city was able to restrain the spending and spend less? Because you mentioned we both took in more revenues and we spent less. And I'm curious, what are the areas that and why?
Some of the areas where we saw the greater amounts of money reverting back to the general fund. To point you to the right schedule here in the booklet. If we look at Schedule 8, it's on page 35. So this represents monies that reverted back to the reserve fund. And you'll see here there was quite a bit of money, and this is not just from 2014, this also includes prior year amounts, but there was quite a bit of money related to the police, as well as human resource benefits and general services, among several others. Now, in terms of the why, perhaps some of that is the management of the budget process in the prior fiscal year, and through the financial status report sessions. But I don't know precisely why some of these reversions have occurred, and I don't know if perchance some of them may end up being reappropriated in the first financial status report, and that may also lend itself to identifying, how and why some of the monies reverted.
To further that response, oftentimes departments come up against the time limits that from the controller and from our office with respect to when they can spend money in the prior fiscal year. So those funds revert to the reserve fund, and as Mr. Bowie mentioned, at times departments will ask for those funds back in the following fiscal year through appropriations. One of the higher amounts there is noted for the capital improvement expenditure program, which is also because they're project specifics expenditures. Some of those projects perhaps fall behind schedule. And so those expenditures also fall behind schedule and will most likely be made in the following fiscal year. But in the case of the police department, this is the savings that were identified going into this fiscal year that will be used for police overtime. So those funds will, in essence, go back to the police department for police overtime.
One other thing that occurred is we also automated the disencumbrance of prior year general fund monies, and that resulted in approximately $13 million being reverted to the reserve fund that was otherwise had been previously encumbered.
That's a one-time bump.
Yes, one time.
And I guess that goes to the bigger question: is how much of this is one-time versus ongoing?
In essence, it's all one time, and as Mr. Seha was mentioning, some of it may be reappropriated in the next financial status report. And then it becomes a matter of each year as the budget is adjusted, those savings would be adjusted accordingly. So as we anticipate certain expenditures occurring, different departments will have their budget adjusted during the course of the fiscal year and result in presumably less money being reverted.
Right, so the savings may not be quite as much as we're looking at now because we're going to invariably reappropriate some of the critical items.
Yeah, definitely there will be some adjustments that will occur.
Mr. Englander? In all seriousness, I want to thank the controller and your office's staff for very helpful, detailed report. One of the things that I think is always one of the critical questions that we have to ask as we go through this process is where that appropriate balance is for the reserve fund. And I very much agree that we have to periodically consider the benefits and risks of having too high or too low of a general fund, and there is no bright line way to really answer that. But I do find it interesting to note that we're above the average of the 10 most populated cities over the last 5 years with our reserve fund. That's a healthy thing, but obviously, the larger the reserve, the less is available for current year expenditures and services to our constituents. So, and investment in infrastructure. So it's not an easy thing, but if we do move forward with the sort of risk-based analysis and approach that your report is indicating, I would think that one of the risk elements to be considered is impact on credit rating as well. And so, if there were a change in that policy, unless it were to increase the policy, it could have a negative impact on our credit rating, which has actual hard dollar impacts on the current fiscal year. So, but with that, anyway, thank you very much, and please extend our thanks to the controller. And if there's no other questions or comments, it will be my expectation that we will note and file the report, but first there's a card, so thank you very much. Mr. Herman.
Thank you.
1 minute.
Good song and dance, but reverting monies is a poor excuse for accountability, for asserting liability, and you heard due to inadequate expending. How? For incomplete jobs, incomplete construction, incomplete infrastructure, and the way you delegate the taxpayers' monies, exposing the city to more and more the so-called high tax-paying dollars. Such a waste and such a failure to discuss a budget that is impractical. And you cannot have an irreversible change to this because you're exposing the city to significant risk by financial failure. You've become the credit card hit and run of this city, and you deserve everything you get based on your irresponsibleness to be accountable.
All right. Without objection, the committee will note and file the controller's report with our thanks. And that brings us then to item number 7.
Item number 7 is the Office of Finance report relative to the monthly investment report for the period ending July 31st, 2014.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your patience. Mr. Do you want to give an overview of the nature of the report? We usually do this on consent, but Mr. Blumenfield had a specific question.
The one question is, I was just a little surprised by the return percentage. It looks to me, and maybe it's because I'm new at this, it looks pretty low. I mean, any investor could do better than that. Even T-bills would do better than that. So why is the return 1%?
Well, we do invest in T-bills, but let me give background. I mean, T-bills we do invest in, but T-bills right now are actually, for the last 3 months or the next 3 months, there's flat to actually negative yields in those because there's a lot of flight to quality in there. The Fed gave up what they call overnight repo program, so they were not buying any more T-bills. So T-bills basically, as you could see actually on the report, we actually managed the core to a T-bill index, which is...
But I was assuming like that's even the lowest. I mean, can't we, with our enormous market share, why are we even comparing ourselves to T-bills? Or is there a way to get a better return on our investment, I guess is the bottom?
Well, to first answer the first question, we compare ourselves to T-bills. We can't because we have to compare ourselves at least for the core account, which is the smaller portion of the general pool, against an index. How we manage that? That's basically by our mandate. We've visited trying to find a better index to match what we actually invest in commercial paper and stuff like that. But the bottom line is we have restrictions as far as credit quality, as far as the short-term instruments. We can go A1, P1. Those are averaging usually about anywhere between 5 and 10 basis points right now. So we're restricted from buying, outside of that range. As far as the reserve pool, we can invest down to what they call single A by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. But those yields are, again, tight as well. Even the 5-year at 175 plus, about 30 or 40 basis points for the average single A. That's only 2.25%, but that's probably the higher yielding instruments we're having on the back end. But on the average, rates are definitely low. And the Fed is continue to do that. And there's basically supply concerns actually on the short end because once the T-bills went flat to negative, a lot of market participants went to buying the stuff that we buy, the high quality stuff. And so in some cases, there's days where there's no offerings at all. And it's very tough just to find something out there. But as far as investment returns, that's as far as we can extend it, given our guidelines.
So compared to other cities, are we in the ballpark, or are we?
Compared to other cities I would characterize as maybe not as sophisticated as we are because we invest in corporate bonds. I talked to other cities before, and they seem to be either shorter in duration or higher in credit quality, meaning that they are actually have a lower yield than most. So because we have the staff to manage a corporate bond portfolio and do the analysis, we're able to reach into those higher yields, but certainly we can't go any farther than that as far as credit risk and also duration of bond. We can only go 5 years in the general pool.
Obviously, the objective here, as opposed to a pension fund, is to ensure liquidity and available cash flow and
safety
preservation of the principal. Yeah. But I noted in the report that the transactions are in accordance with both the government code and the city's investment policy. And I'm wondering, is there any policy distinction between what's permitted under the two? In other words, if you look at the state government code, is there room for even any consideration of revisions to the city's investment policy that might allow us to take advantage of a little bit more, somewhat more yield return while still preserving capital and
we've been looking at. The only thing that has changed recently is on January 1st, we're able to invest in what they call supras, so IFC and World Bank, which we couldn't invest in before because the federal agencies have been shrinking. And so the California CD Act basically approved that. And so a lot of municipalities were looking forward to invest in that. But those yields are comparable to agency securities that we already have. But we're constantly looking at trying to approve. Again, our guidelines are pretty much in line with the California code.
Okay. Anything else on this, members? Okay. Mr. Herman, get your feet off the taxpayers' furniture, please. Okay. We have one card on this matter. It's Mr. Herman. Thank you very much.
Thank you for letting us all know that. So failure to purchase for future cash flow. For what? Investment report. And you heard it. Even Mr. Krikorian couldn't put up a good side face as far as what is there to really discuss here. So the fiscal impact statement, none submitted, other than the wording of the gentleman here. And so again, just poor failure to budget the city's financial responsibilities and continue to look for the investment of all those who are involved in MOUs. And we've heard it over and over by Mr. Sid Marine in council chambers. MOU's a bitch. Business with integrity for the people who in your hands wish for you to invest it appropriately. Save your 1 second. Public comment now.
All right, members, without objection, it'll be the action of the committee to note and file the report on item 7. Members, that concludes the business of the committee other than public comment. I do have a public comment card from Mr. Herman, which I will take. And other than that, that's our last agenda item. So that brings us to public comment. Mr. Herman.
So I just want to bring to your attention, folks, that many of you who do not understand and listen to this, but there's been more than multiple violations of the Brown Act limiting the speakers to 1 minute. And it's a violation to respond to many of the agenda items for under 1 minute. As you may all know, violation of your freedom of speech right, First Amendment right, and under the Constitution. When I spoke to Ms. Roybal Allard this morning there at the Citadel, I mentioned to her how these violations restrict us, and I'm sure that Mr. Roybal Allard and Senator Ralph M. Brown would not agree with your decisions to limit many of the speakers. I find it an insult and unconscionable that you limit speaking. If you don't like criticism, get a different job, because you're doing a bullshit job for the city and the residents of Los Angeles.
There being no other action before the committee, we are adjourned.